Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Lost Origin, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we have 4 tournaments from around the globe happening in person last weekend to go over. 3 of them were up to the Pokemon Go format, but one of them, the Singapore Regional League that we'll be looking at, will be our first indication, as well as the Japanese tournament that I checked out yesterday for the Lost Origin meta, which is now the next chapter for us. So going to be a quick breakdown of these other tournaments, but they were all streamed as well, so lots of things to catch up on if you missed out this weekend. But we will start off with Bilbao. It was a 292 player tournament. I believe there were a number of people that actually dropped in round 1 as well, because there were some travel complications, myself included. I was meant to be playing in this tournament, couldn't in the end, unfortunately. But here we are. Still over 200 players were physically playing in the tournament, I believe. And it was, I believe the pronunciation is Pere, was playing this Mew Genesect deck to a win. And it's been a while since we've seen Mew winning. And there's been a lot of discussion about recent Mew lists. But this is back to good old basics. This is Sparkle Fusion Energy. The only real innovation is the one of Pokestop coming into the deck list as an additional stadium, really, from what we saw at the World Championship. Still valuing those Rotom phones over trekking shoes, for example, and everything else is more or less straightforward. Playing an additional switch out to most. Oftentimes you see a 2-2 switch and rope split, but everything else is pretty cookie cutter. I think the only real omission here would be Oricorio, which can sometimes be a helpful mirror tech card, especially with quad DTE builds going around. But there we go, Mew putting some respect back in its name after the World Championships, where it did admittedly get that top 8 placement. But it, since the very first Astral event where Mew won, was it Astral where it won? I think it did win, right? No, since one of the very first events where it was out in Fusion Strike, actually, it hasn't won a tournament. So yeah, insane. Let's go on to... Sorry, I was just thinking, could it really have been that long ago that it hasn't won a regional? But in my head, it's right. We have Arceus Duraludon, piloted by Ivanov, who, how many times can we say it? One of the most decorated players in the game, surely one of the best players in the game at this point. Brought the Eiffel Tower to Spain, playing Arc Duraludon with a bit more draw than most, having the 4 shoes and the 4 tower, giving this deck a little bit more push potential. And honestly, this deck was in a good meta placement. I think having a good matchup into the World's Winning 60 by just having a little bit of heal was very nice, because the ADP deck doesn't really do much if it's not hitting for key weaknesses, and Duraludon is just kind of difficult to get through when you have these Hyper Potions, and also having Hyper Potions and Avery and Karen's Conviction gives you a decent enough time into Palkia, I think. So, yeah, Stefan, phenomenal player, playing a slightly adapted list from the sort of norm, and it was a good meta call to play this deck. And I think this whole time, Arc Duraludon has been one of these decks where we've seen a lot of online results for it consistently. We haven't seen top players piloting it, knowing that there's not much decision-making necessarily in the deck, not many opportunities for you to make your own choices known. But Ivanov's a good enough player to not worry about those sorts of things, and when the meta's right for it, choose the deck. And yeah, a really excellent display again, getting that 2nd place finish. We have Magnus Pederson with a Palkia Inteleon. Palkia was rife still in this tournament from what I could tell. Even though I was sat here from home, I was looking through deck lists, of course, the whole time. So it's a pretty straightforward list with the heavy VIP pass, and not too much else to be said here. The Crobat being added into the list, which is kind of like a sometimes but not always card being played. And I think actually Palkia may just be staying exactly the same next format. It still seems really good. Same for Mew, really. I think the stadiums change, but more or less the deck is, again, still very capable. Arcdura, it's probably a more difficult time for Arcdura with Giratina hype around. Same thing for this deck list from Owen Kammerman, who won one of the open flights in London with this and got top 32 at Worlds with this list, but with 1 card different, I think. I believe it was increasing a boss and taking out, I think it was a Roxanne that was taking out off the top of my head. But yeah, a real smorgasbord, trying to have answers for everything and juggle it all into one list is brave, and it does mean that you have answers in the majority of situations, where you have the Dark package, a mini fighting package, and Miltank answer. You have the lightning stuff mostly for the one prize decks, as well as Palkia, and then you have the Jolteon as well to try and punish Palkia again that little bit harder. So yeah, really saying no to the barrel is always sketchy to me, but seems to do the job with the double Crobat for early game pushes, and then you have Starbirth, and you just hope that from that early board state you're good enough to shut down other decks, either by going Jolteon, shut down the Palkias, or Path, hope to shut down Mews, that sort of thing. Kind of the main idea here. With the VIP passes as well. Again, scary card, but can allow you to have some big pop-off turns in the opening stages. So yeah, lots to juggle, but proven again at Worlds, proven at the Open even, and proven in Bilbao, so stuck with a 60. They were clearly happy with it, and another great performance from them. They are almost already at their invite, I believe. They are really close, which is insane. They're speedrunning it. We have Joshua, aka Zapdos TCG, running the Reggie Gang, looking very similar to the World 60 from Pablo Meza. This time just adding in ropes, really just saying, let me beat Flying Pikachu. By having the 3 rope, the 2 boss, you should be able to have a decent time into that matchup. So that's always nice to see. No other real innovation around the list. Just seems to be a straightforward 60. That's kind of what you have to do with the Reggies. You can't get too creative with it, I don't think. And I also think Reggies are kind of okay next set. I do think there will be some countering around. There's a possibility that we have to play the likes of Path of the Peak to get around Empoleon and to get around Duraludon and other stuff like that. There's potential for us to, again, still have this high rope count to push Empoleons around as another alternative. And then there's the opportunities for us to go wild with Thornton as well, with new attackers coming into the deck list. I actually don't like the Thornton that much from my testing so far, but what I certainly like is the gift energy coming into the list. Even if it's a 1/2 count, I think it will change up this deck and the dynamic and how safe it is as a choice going forward. So I do think Reggie's probably survive next set. We have Kai Wainwright, again, such a consistent performer since the break from live tournaments. They're again showing their strength, not just with Mew, but now with Palkia Inteleon. It's going to be a rare candy capture energy based build with Big Charm. We actually saw a few lists playing Big Charm, and Kai actually used this against Evenoff to great effect. Like, this is way stronger than a Tool Jammer, surprisingly enough, against Arc Duraludon, because the Palkia can tank the Palkia V, and that has higher base output in that matchup than Subspace Swell in most situations. So actually really awesome to see that adaptation coming into the list. I don't know if it was necessarily for Dura, but it has its merits, and it certainly has upside compared to the Tool Jammer, so just something to bear in mind there. Outside of that, more or less a straightforward 60. Looking pretty solid there. Then we have another Mew from Christian. This was a really wacky deck list to see. This was Christian's first in-person event as well, so that should give a lot of people encouragement if you're, if it's your first time playing the TCG and just haven't really dipped your toe into main events. You can see players like Christian here having deep runs. There's nothing too intimidating about it, and you just got to dip your toe in and see what happens. Even if you don't have a run as good as Christian's, for example, what's there to lose? You're just gaining experience this entire time. And Christian brought a really interesting build, a heavy supporter list of the DTE Mew, with the Marnies, with the Avery, with the Roxanne, giving you more sort of control, I guess, over your opponents throughout the game, and even played a Path to the Peak, which I gotta tell you, I don't recommend, but we did see on stream Christian getting value out of it and frustrating some Arceus players, which is pretty awesome to see. So yeah, the DTE build did really well, actually, in Baltimore, which we'll look at later. But yeah, this list that was brought to us by Pramois, again in the London Open, seems to have kicked on in this format. And I think looking back at this meta, it's going to be an interesting deck list. Certainly one that people will have built, I think. And then we have Julius rounding out the top 8 with the Palkia Inteleon again. I think it's more or less a cookie cutter 60, making it here. Nothing too much stands out in terms of the list. So yeah, pretty solid all round. It's a VIP build, I guess, is the only thing to track. So there we go. There is Bilbao. And if you want to check out the stream, I was actually commentating it from home. You can see there I am with Shay and also Alex Dow. We're all commentating at my house. You can see the background is the same. That's not a coincidence. We did some remote casting. It was a late run thing, but because the three of us, Alex and Shay, were already going to be commentating, but we were all had our travel plans sort of changed over the weekend, and it was kind of a last minute deal. But I think we did a good job. So let us know. I know certainly Shay and Alex would love feedback, and I would love feedback as well for our commentary, because hopefully it's something that we'll be doing again. We really want to try and bring as much European coverage as possible. You know, it's not quite on par with the US production, but I feel like we can still offer a lot. So yeah, check out Limitless_TCG on Twitch, where you can follow the games there, certainly. Then we have the Porto Allegri tournament, which was 253 players in Brazil. And we have Dalton here, who was able to win with a very interesting Arceus list, kind of like a quad Arceus in many ways. But you'll see some similarities here to the success we actually saw with Arc Duraludon, piloted by Ivanov in Europe with this list. I think there's a lot of similarities that can be drawn in that this is playing 3 Pokegear, 3 Sharon's Care. So again, in Arc mirror matches, you have a lot of access to just healing and removing damage from play. You have good one-hit KO ability with slacking and 3 powerful colorless energies. You have that Cape of Toughness for the Blissey or the slacking option for real tank ability. So actually a pretty cool deck list coming out towards the end of the format. Has that high Marnie and Path going on in there as well. So similar to, you know, the big barrel builds that we've seen as a win condition into some matchups. This was actually facing Mew in finals, so it was important there. And yeah, overall just has a lot of space for physical supporters, essentially. That's the main idea, and it's still trying to force a difficult prize race. That's really what we're going for here. The double ordinary rods, similar to the Arcdura, where you don't give people easy horn prizes either, as well as reloading energies so you can Nova onto these expensive attack cost Pokemon. So pretty cool list overall. Just a supporter-heavy Arc with some tech attackers, essentially. And the Blissey having the powerful colorless and the Turbo Energy synergy with Sharon's Care is also very cute for like picking up these cards again to reuse them. So actually kind of cool list, and is difficult to get through, clearly. We then have a Genesect Mew in second place here, and it was the Quad DTE Pokestop list. This is more straightforward, where you're seeing the cross switches, a little bit different from Christian's, where you've got the Silene in here as well. So yeah, again, just proving that it's a good deck list. I think we saw that a few times across the American stream. That was when I was following a little bit more closely. I did watch the finals of this one, though. We had Pedro Pertusi playing a very interesting Intel Zard with a few different toolbox attackers. It has the one Rapid Strike energy to attack with an Urshifu for type coverage without a VMAX, and has a Zeb Striker in here, which does... It's a lightning attacker that does more damage if you used a Rapid Striker to attack with on the previous turn. So let me just make sure here. It's 30 plus 90 more. So you're doing 120, still in need of a Choice Belt to get through Palkias, but can do a good chunk after you've used Keep Calling. I think that's the key attack that you obviously look for with the deck. You can get Blitzel out with Keep Calling as well. So just trying to give yourself some more proactive answers than Radiant Zard has into Palkia. I actually think Intel Zard has a relatively tricky matchup into Palkia if they are playing the likes of that Tool Jammer and the Roxanne, and if they play the one copy of Path, it can be awkward for this deck. So I understand why they've added in the Zebra and even the Urshi to give yourself a slightly better time into, you know, the Palkia most importantly, but also a little bit of help into the Arceus matchups. I do still prefer a streamlined list, personally, but it's just me. And I get the reason why you'd want to add in new stuff. Patricia was able to play Mewtwo Miltank to a top 4 finish. Again, not the only time we saw this deck. I think a lot of people were kind of respecting this less after it flopped at Worlds. So again, you always have that metagaming decision of is it better or is it worse. I really like the adaptation of PCL and Yellhorn. Very, very strong combination. Where you can try and confuse these annoying things rather than having to Silene back hammers, which make you flip even more coins. Having the PCL Yellhorn combo gives your opponent a raw 50-50 basically every turn, where you can get Breathing Room. And whenever you get Breathing Room, things happen pretty quickly. So you really speed up your win condition. when your Mewtwo is in play, and it gets you to swing essentially for free much more quickly, and that really changes board states, whether it's you doing a Psysplosion or a Final Burn. Both are really insane for you. And this list is also playing the Paths. I think Azul also does this, and having Path of the Peak as well. Pretty nice at shutting off Empoleon, so that you can continue to Gormandize. We saw Empoleon in some Ice Rider Palkia at Worlds, and we saw a handful in Palkia Inteleon. So having some paths does give you that option as well, which is kind of cool to see. So yeah, the Mewtwo v Union still a strong archetype in this late metagame. We have some Arc Intel, kind of the forgotten deck of the format. It really fell by the wayside after the NAIC, but still seems to be reasonable here. Again, nothing too surprising about the list. Seeing Avery in here is cool. I think that's really the only thing to bear in mind. Yeah, very straightforward, standard 60, to be fair. And that's where Arc Intel ends up in the end. We have Gustavo Wada playing some Palkia Inteleon. Again, nothing too crazy. Seeing Collapsed in Palkia is an interesting thing. Outside of that, more or less straightforward with the quad VIP at the forefront. And then we have Felipe. We can't see their Arc Flying Peak list, unfortunately, but then we have Chiao, I believe is the way to pronounce their name, and it's another Palk Intel, also playing the Collapse. Yeah, the exact same 60 as Gustavo. Sounds like a good choice to me. And you can also watch the stream over on Games Copag on Twitch. So head on over there if you want to watch the stream. It is in Portuguese, so mute it if you'd like, or do whatever else, get some music on in the background. But yeah, there are certainly games worth watching there as well. And then we head over to Baltimore, the over 1,000 player tournament. This was only 60 less players than the NAIC, so I think we've got some big tournaments in store. Also, just looking at Europe for a special event that doesn't have proper cash prizing on a weekend where a ton of people couldn't actually attend. Still getting to almost 300 people is insane. So I'm imagining even European tournaments will be probably over that like 600 threshold almost universally, I think. So that's going to be really interesting. So yeah, Baltimore and a lot of the American regionals I imagine are going to be sizable. I would imagine like 700 at the low end for regionals this season for the US. And it was won by Piper Lapine, really impressive player. Not just on show over this weekend, but over a number of weekends when they've been making impressive top 16 runs and etc. and stuff like that. They've just been waiting for that breakthrough. And it finally came with Inteleon Zard, very similar to Cawthorn's world list. I think the key difference is an escape rope coming into the 60, which is just a very reasonable include to improve your time against good old Flying Pikachu, for one thing. Also very helpful against Mew, as we saw in the finals. So yeah, just a slight adaptation to Ross's list was all that was required to take down the win. I think there's also a second copy of Mew in here instead of Snorlax, which maybe makes Piper a little bit happier going first, I guess, would be the only thing. So a few tweaks, not just the one, to be fair. But yeah, really solid list. We knew that from Cawthorn's world's record. It was absurd over the 2 days. And Piper played it faster, which meant that she didn't tie as much, which is a great play. Then we have Isaac with the DTE Mew in finals as well. Again, this is more similar to the 60 that we saw from Pram. Just doing the Pokestop shenanigans stuff seems very cool. And the Pokestop build did put on a good display, I think, over the course of the weekend. Now we get to Drew Kennett. And I don't know what to tell you, because one Registeel, you will never, ever convince me on one Registeel. At first, when I heard the rumours that one Registeel was going around, I was like, maybe Drew's playing, like, 3 Hisuian, and they're saying that, like, playing an extra copy of Hisuian is like almost always better than a second Registeel, but playing one Registeel and one Hisuian is the greediest thing I've ever seen, and I cannot justify it in any way. Especially when you're already committing to having a third Aleki and a third Drago. It's just like, this is so crazy. So yeah, we know Drew's a great player and loves to innovate, but this is one that I will just have to shake my head at, to be honest. The rest of the list is looking pretty cool. Seeing Bruno's over Cynthia's is a small debate to be had. And having a split of Pokestop and Path is interesting. Having some respect for Duraludon and some respect for Empoleon at the same time, I would imagine. It's kind of cool. But yeah, that's... yeah, you will never sell me on this. It is absurd. Answers on a postcard. Because, yeah, I'm lost for words with that one. Makani was playing Ice Rider Palkia. Unfortunately, not able to see their deck list. Jeremy was playing, again, the DTE-based Mew build. Again, so I think it's just the same 60 that we've seen. Maybe a card or two different from ones previously, but more or less the same game plan going in. Nicholas Moffat, someone who's already made a name for themselves as being a fantastic Inteleon player throughout last season, in a few different variations, proves it again by knowing the ins and outs of this Radiant Zard-based build. And is this the same as Cawthorn's list? Again, this looks closer still by having the Snorlax and the Mew and then the one rope. So maybe this is just a one card different from Piper's. Something like that. Very close. But yeah, again, more proof that this archetype was extremely strong and that Nicholas knows how to shady deal chain and get the job done. A return to Pokemon for Joey Rutiger as well with the Mew VMAX DTE build. I think they posted that they think this list is absolutely cracked and seem to have a great performance. Great to see Joey back. Definitely a strong player in their time. And then we have Jack Moore playing Miltank Morpeko, kind of the surprise deck of the tournament. Quad Miltank, difficult to deal with for anything that doesn't have wall breaking. Mew, being one of the main decks that does have wall breaking, kind of stutters to Hammers and Yveltal at times, especially the 4 DTE 1 Silene lists. So trying to capitalize on that has big upsides. Having this Torment Morpeko attack as well can be really annoying, forcing switch outs from certain decks. Kind of cool. Having the Alecki to recover trainers as well, be it Hammers, be it Disruption. Cards like that is probably the main thing we're looking for here. Heavy Avery for disruption and slowing down Palkia, I guess, is kind of the main idea here. Having even the Pokemon Go Ditto to cosplay, flip between Morpeko and Alecki is really, really cool. And even having the option to be another Yveltal, very, very cool include with the heavy twin and the DTE. Very, very interesting to see. But I think really this isn't a pure control. This is like, eventually Miltank will get you because not enough decks are playing answers to Miltank. I would have easily fallen to this deck as well, I think, had I been playing in Baltimore with the list that I was choosing to play. And I think a lot of people were, if people even were net decking Hisuian Decidueye, it's going to falter to all this energy disruption, I think, as long as the flips aren't terrible for them. And then you just don't have enough answers to Quad Milk. And I think Quad Milk is just too difficult to deal with for a ton of decks in the game. So, yeah, basically capitalizing on what was probably a down tick in Mewtwo, which was one of the things stopping, like, Miltank alone winning. Like, Mewtwo is actually really annoying for other controlling and stalling decks because it just beats it so handily. But there we go. Also, yeah, like, Hisuian Decidueye did so well that people were thinking Miltank was like less on the radar, so then you go against the grain and you can get rewarded by people who cut Decidueye or even thin down that line or whatever. Can be really important. And yeah, you basically just catch people off guard with this list because we've had no reason to even think about it as a deck in the game until exactly this tournament. So still innovation happening at the latter stages of the event, which is really cool. And you can obviously watch this over on the official Pokemon Twitch, not the Pokemon TCG one, because VG isn't happening just yet. It's on the official Pokemon one. Hopefully that helped with views. I think by the looks of things, it really did. So yeah, great stuff there. After a lot of discussion and closing the chapter on the Sword and Shield to Pokemon Go formats, we will quickly look at this over 100-player Singapore Regional League, which is Lost Origin. This has... Actually, we're doing okay for time. I don't have to rush this too much. We see 4 deck lists, but the top 8 included 2 Arceus Tinas, as well as 3 Mew. We only see one of the lists, but yeah, Mew still seems to be very strong. Arc Tina was not something I saw do too well in the Japanese tournament, so seeing Arceus is alive and well is something that's good to see, I think. because I would be surprised if Starbirth just started being bad. But then we have a Lost Zone 1 prize box, we have Mew, we have a Kieran Palkia, and we have a Lost Zone Tina to look at. So Tan was able to win here with this toolbox, which is very, very boxy. It's playing the Mirage Gates in here, so you can burst Excel to your Snorlax, to your Zeraora as a Palkia kind of soft counter. I think the interesting about Zeraora, when you play this sort of list, is that you don't need to accompany it with the choice belt. Like, yes, you have the Raihan option. Yes, you have like the gate option, and sometimes you have your choice belt. But just putting a good chunk into a Palkia lets you do shenanigans with Sableye later. So that's really cool. Snorlax just being this kind of big dude that's annoying for other Cramorants is definitely nice. And just, again, that high threshold of 180 is so strong. It plays Water Energy, so you can burst onto Radiant Greninja when you need to. And the Sableye, I think, is, again, low-key a bit of an all-star in this deck, especially when you play the Crabominable V. Not something I was really thinking about when I was building my Lost Zone boxes, but definitely something in the back of my mind now. Because you already like Water Energy for Greninja, why not have a Mirage Gate option for Crab, and you just put, like, 4 counters onto V-Stars and V-Maxes and set them up for the Crab V, whilst also knocking out, like, a Comfey or a Sobble or one of those lower hit point things with your Sableye. So just using your excess counters to then set up your next KO with the Mirage Gate Crab play is very clever, actually. So cool to see. A decent number of two prizes in here as well, with the Drapion one way around. The Mew matchup, of course, is getting one activation of Drapion, makes that matchup pretty free for you, I feel. And there's not much your opponent can do about just a Drapion coming down and smacking. Even if they come back with the Lost City, it's already done the damage most of the time. So yeah, heavy Ornery Rod, pretty nice because you have so many 2 and 1 counts going on here. Have the Echoing Horn, which is a cheeky card alongside Boss, of course, but also alongside Sableye, where you can bring back a 60 hit point Mon and just sprinkle it again and then get excess counters around the board, even 70 hit point Mons, that sort of thing. So the Horn is very cool alongside Sableye. Big fan of that. Otherwise, looking pretty cool and straightforward. Well, not really straightforward because there's options galore. I shouldn't use that word. But what you'd expect, really. Maybe a little bit light on the switching cards. I guess that's kind of the thing we lose out on with all these options. You basically lose out on just playing switch cards and just have more dig for Comfey early. That would really be the only thing that I would have in the back of my mind going on here. So yeah. Lost Zone boxes, something that I'm really enamored by. I think it's going to be great, this set, in various forms. And you're never going to know which one you're up against until it's too late, I think. Then we have a Mew in second place. This is very similar to the Pram Mew, I guess, but has Cheryl as an option in here, which is pretty cool. Also has 1 Lost City, so a bit of respect for Drapion, a bit of respect for Radiant Zards, that sort of thing. I imagine you have to cram heads it or have to silent heads to get it back to be a good card against Reggie's, but I guess you have Silene and Pad to try and make it that way, so yeah, seems like a reasonable include. I think Lost City is going to be core for Mew the more I think about it. At first I was mid on it, but now I'm like, yeah, it makes enough sense and enough matchups that we have to kind of do it. We do see, as my computer stops loading, a Kieran Palkia here at third place. And it's cool to see. We've seen this doing really well in online tournaments recently. There's some interesting includes, like Adventurer's Discovery coming into the list. Wasn't expecting that necessarily. A bit of a thinner line of the Kieran than I'd expect. Seeing the Drapion in here, giving a lot of respect to Mew, makes a good amount of sense, especially if you can go Drapion into your 3-prizer. That seems like a difficult map for them. Has a Collapsed in here, which could be pretty good at denying some Sableye shenanigans. I think Collapse is low-key going to be like a bit of a winner in this set, because I think there's going to be a lot of setup damage around the board with like these cram Sableye decks that if you can buy a turn back just by collapsing away something they had prepped, you're going to be in a good spot. So I think Collapse is low-key going to be a big card this format. Has the Wash Water to help out against Giratina, so very heavily teched out, really. This is a bit of a wacky list, I want to say. There's a lot going on here with cards that I wouldn't necessarily expect in the list. So a lot of options, again, just giving yourself outs to all sorts of matchups. And then we have Kang with the Lost Zone Tina build. Again, the water energy's been shining through. That was the case yesterday in the Japanese tournament that we looked at with over 3,000 players. Now we see a list with water energy and the Thornton package. So this is looking much more similar to Gustavo Wada's 60 that has been doing well with online. So that's really cool to see. And it seems to be a good choice. Has Path to the Peak as well, not something I necessarily expect in a lot of Giratinas, but does give you defensive players with Path Roxanne, which is kind of cool. And I do really like Roxanne, and I kind of like Thornton as well. I keep calling it Thornton. I don't know why that's in my head, but Thornton is the name of the card. It gives you burst potential with your Tina, which is always nice. For me, I do still like Snorlax coming into this deck as well. I think it's a really important card for Tina personally. But yeah, really happy with this to be fair. And I think Tina's getting smarter, wiser, and just better as the days go by. I think it's getting optimized. I think we're figuring out that it's not a conventional deck in terms of how it does its prize trade. It's not going to be content going 2/2/2, let me race you, just like Palkias and just like Zoroarks and that sort of thing that always wants a V or V-star Pokemon to be around so you can take those prizes easily with your high damage output. Giratina is going to be much more like fast and loose and flexible with its output, and then suddenly boom, Thornton game. So yeah, that's kind of the sneaky strats with the Tinas. I think you low-key want 1V in the discard pile at some point so you can get this Thornton play off. So yeah, still lots to be said about the Lost Zone. I think it opens so many doors, and I really dread when anyone flips over a config against me, because I'm immediately having to play around Sableye, Greninja, Zard, Thornton, like so many things just from the outset. I don't know what I'm up against, and at any point there's random justification for Mirage Gate, this X attacker that they've added just for my matchup or whatever, and you just kind of have to realize that by turn 3 or 4 you're dead. So it's gonna be such a difficult deck to follow, but I think it's got a ton of potential. So yeah, lots of tournament results, closing the chapter now on the Pogo format, but it was really awesome to see that it had already adapted from the World Championship. Some people took the best performing lists, obviously. Some people adapted the best performing lists from Worlds. A lot of people actually liked Pramort's Mew list as well. So a lot of Mew One Last Riders out there as well. And Singapore kicks things off for the Lost Origin meta, and already some great results. So let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.